Hey real estate nerds, this is Alex Yoder with Pro Tip Tuesday, my favorite day of the week. And today I want to talk to you about a question that I keep on getting, which is for housing providers who are doing this every day, what are we seeing in terms of bills that were passed in 2025 and the actual impact for those with boots on the ground? So sort of what is it that we are seeing the most of in terms of the way that some of these bills have impacted us? And I'm sure there are many different opinions on this because there were several bills passed last year that could be in part of the conversation. But what I'm seeing the most of so far is lease breaks that pertain to gender-based violence. So if you're not aware, I did a previous video on this. There is a bill that was passed pertaining to gender-based violence, and that was an amendment of a previous bill that was all about domestic violence. So it sort of broadened that definition, but also redefine sort of the way some of these things are handled. And namely, and what I've seen the most of, is the provision in that bill that presumes that the alleged victim is the owner of the security deposit. Now, let's say you have a tenant who is an alleged victim and they're breaking the lease because of this, and the alleged abuser is on the lease in the tenancy. You might end up in a situation where you are giving the deposit, or giving the ownership or assigning the ownership of the deposit in your deposit reconciliation for that one person when they leave. And now you may be stuck in a situation where that remaining alleged abuser has no deposit and can't afford the property and still has a lease with you. And that could get messy. Now you may have to do an eviction. There's all kinds of cost to that. And so the question mark is, how do you navigate that well? There are several legal interpretations, which is why this all gets so confusing. But the legal interpretation that we are going with, based on our legal counsel's advice, is to treat that notice to break lease as a notice, even if it was from one person, for the entire party. So for all tenants on the contract, this is a lease break, period. And then you can decide from there if you want to renegotiate a new lease with anybody who wants to stay in the property, and you could potentially try to perform some kind of a move-in, move-out evaluation for any damages on the property and sort of restart things if you so choose from there. Because then you're not stuck in a situation where you have to do that, and you can sort of evaluate and renegotiate as you choose. So we are a big fan of that approach, and that's what we would generally recommend that you do as well, and that you treat that notice to break lease for reasons of gender-based violence as a notice from the party as a whole, and then sort of roll from there. Now, the other thing you're going to want to think about in that situation is, let's say you have a situation where it's a pair of roommates, and the alleged abuser is not a party to the lease. Now you have a situation where one person is potentially wanting to vacate and is wanting to sort of take the deposit because it's presumed that they own the deposit, and another person who wasn't even involved at all with this breakdown in this relationship is now potentially being penalized. Our advice is that you speak with your attorney about sort of having a situational exception for that, where in that situation only the deposit is maybe presumed to be owned in equal portions. Now, we don't generally advise that. Most attorneys are not going to generally advise that you do that equal portions thing, because your tenants are typically renting in severalty, aka even if there's 10 people, they're treated as one person, which is wise for many reasons. But for this one particular bill, and in response to this one particular situation, we would recommend that you look at some language that sort of defines how that's handled, so that it's sort of done in a systematic and a streamlined way. And of course, as always, talk with your attorney about how to get that language and exactly how you want to put that forward. But hopefully this was helpful and at least got you thinking, because that's what we are seeing quite a bit of, very unfortunately. And I know these are hard times, and I know that's been a big issue even since COVID in 2020. But it's definitely popped up for us several times since that went into effect, and we've had to create a 5-page policy manual on what to do, and if-thens and templates and all kinds of stuff. So for those of you in particular who are doing it professional, professionally, you're going to want to have a standardized way to handle it, and that is what we would recommend so that you can be in a position to either terminate that agreement or to situationally renegotiate with anyone that you want to remain in the property after the termination of that tenancy. Hopefully this was helpful. We'll see you next week.